You can't afford this place.
the waitress whispered, eyes flicking to the marble floor like it might crack from the words alone. I'm just trying to save you the embarrassment. A few tables over, a woman in a tailored blazer watched with faint amusement, fingers resting beside a crystal glass. Then the single father didn't argue, didn't leave, didn't even look angry. He simply stayed seated, because beneath the linen and judgment, something far more dangerous than pride was already stirring. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. Begins without spectacle, because the real story isn't about a man being shamed in public. It's about how easily power mistakes silence for weakness, and how fast certainty collapses when it's built on appearances. The boy beside him shifted, small hands tightening on the edge of the table. Elias Rowan noticed before anyone else did. He always noticed first. He lowered his voice, steady, murmuring reassurance while the restaurant's low hum pressed in from every direction. Cutlery chimed, glasses clinked. Somewhere beneath the polished calm, something vibrated wrong. He didn't look up at the owner right away. He didn't need to. He could feel her attention like pressure on the back of his neck. The remaining subpart flows without pause. He'd chosen the restaurant because it was quiet at this hour, because his son had asked to see the water through the tall windows, because sometimes, after weeks of takeout and careful budgeting, a father wanted to offer one small, normal thing. That was all. No statement, no challenge, just dinner. The chair across from him scraped as a server adjusted place settings that didn't belong to him. The linen was thick. The silverware is heavy. Everything here was designed to remind people who they were supposed to be. He rested his palms flat on the table, grounding himself, and felt a faint tremor travel through the surface. Not enough for alarm. Enough to register. Across the room, Celeste Ward stood and finally approached. She moved with the ease of someone accustomed to rooms parting for her, heels confident against stone. Conversation softened as she passed, the way they always did when authority entered shared space. Her gaze landed on the child first, then returned to the father with something like pity sharpened into judgment. "This section is reserved," she said lightly, the smile never quite reaching her eyes. "I'm sure you understand." He looked up then, met her gaze, calm, unshakable. "We're fine," he replied. The words were simple, almost gentle, but they didn't bend. The boy coughed, shallow and tight. Elias was already reaching into his jacket, already counting breaths, already angling his body to shield small shoulders from curious stares. A few diners shifted uncomfortably. Someone sighed. The imbalance in the room widened. Celeste's patience thinned. She gestured subtly, a signal meant for staff, for removal, for things to be handled out of sight. This was her domain. Problems were escorted away before they became scenes. Another tremor ran through the floor, stronger this time. A glass tipped, then steadied. Elias's eyes flicked toward the far wall, toward a decorative column wrapped in steel and stone. The vibration wasn't from footsteps. It was deeper, structural. He stood, slowly, not in defiance, in response. That was the moment the room stilled. The owner froze mid-gesture, surprise breaking through composure as chairs shifted and heads turned. Standing changed the math. Standing demanded attention. "I need you to clear this section," he said, voice even, carrying just far enough. "Now." Someone laughed, sharp and disbelieving. Celeste opened her mouth, authority ready to snap back into place. She saw the worn jacket, the scuffed shoes, the way he positioned himself between the room and his child. She saw a man out of place. She did not see the engineer mapping load paths in his head, calculating stress points by instinct. She did not hear the warning groan beneath the music. She did not feel the building telling the truth. And the floor shuddered again, unmistakable this time. A server gasped. The chandeliers swayed, crystals whispering against each other. Panic rippled outward, fast and contagious. Elias didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Everyone needs to move," he said, already guiding his son back, already scanning exits, already working. Years he hadn't spoken about pressed forward, precise and alive. Celeste's face drained of color as the reality she'd dismissed asserted itself. Money couldn't steady a foundation. Status couldn't stop gravity. And for the first time since he'd walked in, the man she'd judged for not belonging was the only one in the room who knew exactly what was happening. The ground beneath them cracked. The crack sounded like a gunshot swallowed by carpet and chandeliers. Plates rattled. A woman screamed. The father's hand closed around his son's shoulder, firm but gentle, steering him away from the table as the marble split another inch, spidering toward the center of the room. "Hey, hey, look at me," he murmured, keeping his voice low while everything else rose. "Breathe slowly, just like we practiced." The boy nodded, eyes wide, coughing once more before the inhaler did its quiet work. Around them, order dissolved, chairs scraped back. Someone knocked over a tray of glasses, the shatter sharp and endless. Staff clustered near the bar, frozen between protocol and fear. Celeste Ward stood rooted, disbelief etched across her face as the immaculate space betrayed her. "What's happening?" she demanded, voice tight, already useless. "No time," he said, not unkindly. "The load shifted. You've got a failure near the E support. Everyone off this floor." She scoffed reflexively, training kicking in. "You don't—" Another tremor cut her off. This one rolled underfoot, deep and undeniable. The room tilted just enough for panic to take hold completely. "Move!" someone shouted. He didn't wait for permission. He guided his son toward the service corridor, scanning faces as he went, pointing, redirecting. "Stairs, not the elevator. Leave your bags, follow the wall." His tone carried because it had to. Because in moments like this, certainty mattered more than titles. A waiter hesitated. "Sir, we're supposed to—" "Listen to him," an older man snapped, already herding his wife forward. "He knows." Celeste watched control slip through her fingers. Money, influence, reputation. None of it told her what to do now. She followed, heels slipping on polished stone as another crack echoed behind them. The service corridor was narrower, louder. Pipes rattled overhead. Water dripped somewhere unseen. He crouched briefly, pressed his palm to the wall, felt the vibration travel unevenly. His jaw tightened. Secondary stress. They were running out of margin. "Keep going," he urged, ushering staff ahead. "Get them outside." One of the cooks grabbed his arm. "You coming?" "In a second." He glanced back toward the dining room, calculating. Someone was still inside. He could hear crying. Celeste caught up, breathless. "You can't go back there." He met her eyes, calm, cutting through her panic. "Someone's trapped." For a moment, pride flared, then fear overrode it. She nodded once, sharply. "I'll clear the exit." He moved fast. The dining room looked different now, fragile, exposed. A section of ceiling had sagged, dust floating like smoke. Beneath it, a server crouched, frozen. "It's okay," he said, approaching carefully. "Stand when I say, now." He guided her out, one hand steadying her elbow as the floor shuddered again, protesting their weight. Outside, cold air hit hard. Sirens wailed in the distance. Patrons clustered in shock, some filming, some crying. Celeste barked orders that finally landed, staff spreading out, accounting for faces. The father stepped back, keeping his son close, eyes still on the building. Emergency lights flickered on. The structure groaned, settling into a tense, temporary equilibrium. "You," Celeste said, turning on him. Her voice shook. "Who are you?" He exhaled slowly. "Right now? I'm the guy telling you that if anyone goes back inside before it's shored up, it comes down." Fire trucks screeched to a halt. Engineers followed, scanning damage, confused by the scene already half managed. One of them frowned, looking at the fractures, then at him. "Did you redirect traffic off the load zone?" "Yes," he said, "and you'll want to brace the east column first. The decorative wrap's hiding the worst of it." The engineer blinked. "How do you—" "Just do it." Celeste's world narrowed to that exchange. The way professionals deferred. The way the man she'd dismissed stood with quiet authority, his child safe at his side. "By the way, if you're still watching, make sure you're subscribed. Stories like this only work when you don't miss what happens next." She swallowed, something shifting painfully inside her. The night air hummed with sirens and murmurs. Cameras turned, whispers spread, and beneath it all, the restaurant stood, damaged, humbled, and very much alive, because the wrong man had been underestimated at exactly the wrong moment. The engineer crouched near the caution tape, flashlight cutting across fractured marble and exposed steel. He traced a crack with his gloved finger, brow furrowed. "This shouldn't have held as long as it did," he muttered to his partner. "Someone reduced the live load fast." Celeste heard it. The words landed heavier than the sirens. She stood a few steps back, arms wrapped around herself against the cold, watching the scene she could no longer command. Firefighters moved with purpose now, unrolling braces, marking safe zones. Paramedics checked guests for injuries. The crowd lingered despite police urging them to clear out, phones raised, curiosity feeding on shock. He stayed near the edge, one hand resting on his son's shoulder, the other tucked into his jacket. The boy leaned into him, exhausted, eyes half-lidded but calm. Safe. That mattered more than anything else unfolding. Celeste approached slowly, heels abandoned somewhere inside, blazer smeared with dust. "They're saying you stabilized the evacuation," she said. Her voice lacked its earlier edge. "That you noticed the failure before any alarms." He nodded once. "The alarms are decorative. They're not tied into the structure." That stung. It was true. She'd signed off on the aesthetic upgrade herself. One of the firefighters joined them, helmet tucked under his arm. "Sir, we're going to need a statement. You saved lives tonight." He shook his head. "I just paid attention." The firefighter smiled faintly. "That's usually enough." Celeste watched the exchange, as something unraveling inside her. Power had always answered to her name. Tonight, it had answered competence. She glanced back at the restaurant, her flagship, her symbol, now wrapped in tape and flashing lights, stripped of mystique. "Who are you?" she asked again, quieter this time. He considered the question. The answer was complicated, heavy. "A dad," he said finally. She almost laughed, then stopped herself. The simplicity felt earned. An inspector arrived, tablet in hand, eyes scanning. "We'll need access to the original structural plans." Celeste straightened instinctively. "I can have my office." "I remember them," he said, surprising them both. The east support was retrofitted after the seawall expansion. The load transfer was never meant to carry this kind of weight. The inspector looked up sharply. "You worked on this building?" "Not this one," he replied. "Others like it." A pause followed. The kind that opens doors no one expects. The inspector nodded slowly. "Stay close." As they moved back toward the perimeter, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered his words, repeating them wrong, embellishing. A phone camera lingered on him, then on his son. The narrative was already shifting. Celeste felt exposed in a way she hadn't since her first failed venture years ago. She remembered dismissing warnings then, too. Remember the cost. "You were told to leave," she said suddenly, stopping him. "You were humiliated." He met her gaze, tired but steady. "That happens." "No," she insisted, voice tightening. "It shouldn't." The boy tugged at his sleeve. "Can we go home?" "Soon," he said, kneeling briefly to meet his eyes. "Just a little longer." Celeste watched that moment, the way he softened, the way the chaos faded for him entirely. Something in her chest shifted, uncomfortable and undeniable. Sirens faded as the situation stabilized. The restaurant stood wounded but upright. Inspectors conferred. Firefighters packed up. The crowd thinned, disappointment setting in as the crisis ebbed. One of the engineers approached again, excitement barely contained. "Sir, the bracing you suggested, it worked perfectly. We're crediting you in the report." He nodded, accepting without flourish. Celeste exhaled, long and slow. The night had stripped her of certainty and handed it to someone she'd barely seen. "I owe you an apology," she said. The words tasted unfamiliar. He didn't rush to answer. "Make sure no one else gets hurt," he said instead. "Oh, that's enough." She swallowed, nodding. "It will be." As emergency vehicles pulled away, cameras caught the final image. A man in a worn jacket holding his child close, standing calmly in the wreckage of a world that had underestimated him. And Celeste Ward knew, with a clarity she couldn't escape, that the story people would tell tomorrow would not be the one she'd written for him when the night began. The last fire truck rolled away, its red lights washing briefly over the cracked facade before disappearing down the waterfront road. What remained was an uneasy quiet, the kind that followed near disaster, heavy with unanswered questions. Temporary barriers ringed the restaurant now, orange and unmissable, turning luxury into liability. He stayed where he was, watching inspectors move in and out, marking surfaces with chalk, murmuring measurements. The boy sat on a low concrete planter beside him, legs swinging slightly, fatigue finally winning. He draped his jacket over small shoulders without thinking. Celeste lingered nearby, phone pressed to her ear, voice low and urgent. "I don't care what it costs," she said. "I want the best structural team here by morning. Yes, all of them." She paused, eyes flicking toward him again. "No, I'm serious." She ended the call and stood still for a moment, staring at the building like it had personally betrayed her. When she turned back, some of the steel had drained from her posture. "They're saying we'll be shut down for weeks," she said, not accusing, just stating facts. "That's optimistic," he replied. She let out a humorless breath. "You don't soften blows, do you?" "Buildings don't," he said. "Oh, I just listen." That answer unsettled her more than anger would have. She watched him adjust the jacket around his son, notice the care, the practiced motion. This wasn't improvisation. This was someone used to holding things together. An inspector approached, tablet glowing in the dark. "We'll need you both tomorrow," he told Celeste. "And you," he added, turning to the father. "If you're willin'." Celeste blinked. "Him?" "Yes," the inspector said. "He understands this structure better than anyone here." The imbalance she'd relied on all evening tilted further. She nodded, slowly. "Of course." The inspector moved on. Silence stretched between them, awkward and thick. "You didn't have to stay," she said finally. I know. Why did you? He looked at the building again, then down at his son. Because leaving problems half seen is how people get hurt. That landed harder than accusation. She thought of budgets approved too quickly, warnings waved away, corners smoothed over with money. She'd built an empire on decisive action. Tonight had exposed the cost of ignoring quiet voices. A small crowd still lingered across the street. Someone called out his name, just his first, testing it like a rumor. He didn't respond. Celeste shifted, uncomfortable. They'll want interviews, media, you should be ready. He shook his head. Not interested. You don't want credit? I want my kid home. The simplicity of it made her chest tighten. She'd sacrificed nights, relationships, whole years for her vision. Here was someone who'd given something up, too, but for reasons that felt heavier. A black car pulled up. Her driver stepped out, holding the door. She hesitated, then waved him off. Give me a minute. She turned back to the man she'd dismissed hours ago. I was wrong, she said, the words stripped of polish. About you, about a lot. He met her gaze, searching for defensiveness, finding none. What you do next matters more. She nodded slowly. Come by the office tomorrow. We'll talk. He almost smiled. Almost. We'll see. The boy stirred, eyes fluttering open. Are we going? Yeah, he said softly. We're going. He helped him to his feet, slung the jacket properly over his shoulders, and started toward the bus stop at the corner. Celeste watched him go, the image burning itself into her memory. The man walking away from the wreckage of her pride without a backward glance. As they waited, a tremor passed through the building again, smaller this time, settling. The inspectors froze, then relaxed when nothing followed. Celeste exhaled, long and shaky. She'd built places meant to impress, to dominate skylines and conversations. Tonight had taught her something harsher and truer. Some foundations failed because they were designed to ignore the weight they carried. Across the street, the bus arrived with a hiss of air and tired hydraulics. He stepped on, guiding his son ahead of him, disappearing into ordinary light. Celeste stood alone with the barricades and the silence, knowing the story wasn't over. Not for her. Not for him. And for the first time, she wasn't sure who would be standing when it was. Morning came too fast and not fast enough. He stood across the street from the building with a paper cup of coffee, warming his hands, watching sunlight crawl over the damaged facade. In daylight, the fractures looked worse. Honest, in a way darkness had softened. The restaurant's name still gleamed above the entrance, but the illusion was gone. His son sat on the low wall beside him, swinging his legs again, energy slowly returning. Is it broken forever? The boy asked. No, he said, just needs the right fixes. They crossed when the inspector waved them over. Temporary supports now framed the entrance, steel braced against stone like bones set after a bad fall. Inside, the space smelled different. Dust, metal, something raw beneath the polished surfaces. Celeste Ward stood near a folding table that hadn't been there before, blazer replaced by a simple coat. Blueprints were spread out, corners curling. Engineers clustered nearby, voices low, respectful in a way that hadn't existed last night. She looked up when she saw him, surprise flickering, then something close to relief. You came. I said we'd see. She nodded once. Thank you. They moved inside together, the boy staying close, fingers hooked into a belt loop. The engineer stepped aside instinctively, making room. He crouched near one of the supports, eyes tracing stress lines, hands hovering without touching. You reinforced the wrong section, he said quietly. One of the engineers stiffened. "Excuse me?" "The load transfer isn't vertical here," he replied, already standing, already walking them through it with gestures instead of diagrams. "It's pulling sideways because of the seawall pressure. You brace this, it just moves the problem." Silence followed. Then the engineer exhaled. "He's right." Celeste watched it happen. The deference, the shift, like watching gravity change direction. She folded her arms, absorbing the truth she'd ignored too many times. Expertise didn't announce itself with confidence. It waited to be asked. They spent the next hour moving through the building, floor by floor. He pointed out hairline fractures others missed, and explained why cosmetic fixes would fail. He never raised his voice, never claimed authority. He simply corrected errors before they became disasters. At one point, Celeste pulled him aside. "You could consult," she said, "with us, permanently." He glanced at his son, now sitting on a crate, coloring quietly with a borrowed pen. "I don't want my life back," he said. "I just want it to work." She nodded, understanding more than she liked. "Then help me make sure this place doesn't hurt anyone ever again." That was something he could stand behind. Outside, a small crowd had gathered again. Word traveled fast. Phones lifted when they saw him through the glass, moving confidently through a space he'd been told he couldn't afford. Someone recognized him from the night before. A reporter edged closer. Celeste noticed. "They'll make you a story," she warned. He shrugged. "They already did." The inspector approached with a clipboard. "We're reopening in phases," he said. "Thanks to your intervention, damage was limited. We'll note that." Celeste met his eyes. "I want it noted publicly." The inspector raised an eyebrow but nodded. "By the way, if you're still here with us, make sure you're subscribed. Stories about quiet power don't always get told unless you stick around." The reporter called out a question. "Sir, are you an engineer?" He paused, then answered honestly. "I was. And now?" He looked down at his son, who looked back up at him, smiling. "Now, I'm something else." Cameras clicked. Celeste felt the weight of what she was witnessing settle fully. This wasn't charity. This wasn't redemption wrapped in PR. This was accountability unfolding in daylight. Later, as they stepped back outside, she stopped him. "I meant what I said last night," she told him. "I was wrong, and I won't pretend otherwise." He studied her face, saw the discomfort, the effort it took. "Good," he said. "Then do better." She smiled, small but real. "I intend to." He walked away again, son at his side, leaving her with a building that would stand because someone she'd dismissed had refused to look away. Across the street, people whispered his name now with respect instead of amusement. The tide had turned, not with applause, but with proof. And as the sun climbed higher, illuminating every crack and brace, the restaurant became something new. A reminder that dignity doesn't ask permission. The second walkthrough began where the first had ended, at the east support that still hummed faintly under strain. The temporary braces held, but only just. He knelt again, fingertips grazing dust on the floor, listening with his body the way he always had. The building wasn't angry anymore. It was tiring. Engineers hovered nearby, quieter now, notebooks out. One of them watched his hands more than the walls. "You feel that?" the man asked. "Yes," he replied. "Sheer stress hasn't settled. It won't until you relieve pressure from the upper deck." "That deck's decorative," another engineer said automatically. "It shouldn't." "It does," he interrupted, not sharp. "Just certain." Because someone wanted a view and didn't want to pay for the reinforcement. Celeste flinched. The words landed cleanly, factual, impossible to dodge. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. This wasn't an accusation. It was a diagnosis. The inspector nodded slowly. We missed that. Because you were told it couldn't be a problem, he said. Money has a way of convincing people of that. They moved upward, step by careful step, the space stripped of luxury now. Ceiling panels were gone, wiring exposed like veins. The boy waited below with the safety officer, coloring quietly, humming to himself. Every few minutes, he looked up to check the stairs. At the upper level, he stopped beside a wide window overlooking the water. The view was breathtaking, exactly as intended. He tapped the frame lightly. This, he said. This is where it started. An engineer frowned. The glass? The cut, he corrected. It was widened. It shifted the load path, small change, big consequence. The room went still. Someone pulled up original schematics on a tablet, fingers flying. The discrepancy appeared in red. Celeste closed her eyes briefly. She remembered the meeting, the argument, her own impatience. Make it work, she'd said. People won't notice. They noticed now. This needs to come out, the inspector said, immediately. And the deck below needs shoring before you touch it, he added, or it all transfers downward. The engineers nodded, already moving, already deferring. It wasn't dramatic. It was inevitable. As they worked, word spread beyond the building. A local news van pulled up, then another. A reporter approached the barrier, microphone raised. Celeste saw him and sighed. Then she straightened. She stepped forward instead of hiding. You'll want to talk to him, she said, gesturing toward the man in the worn jacket. He's the reason no one died here. The reporter blinked. Sir, he shook his head. Not now. Celeste met his eyes, questioning. After it's safe, he clarified. Then, she nodded, accepting the boundary. The inspector approached again. We ran your suggestions through our models, he said. They check out, all of them. Good, he said. Then we're done here. But, the inspector hesitated. You should know. Your name's in the original design archives, on 3 projects. We didn't connect it last night. He stiffened slightly. Not fear, recognition. I didn't use it after. Celeste's breath caught. The pieces slid into place with a dull, heavy click. Prestigious builds. Awards she'd attended. Articles she'd skimmed. And the man she'd dismissed because of his shoes. I owe you more than an apology, she said quietly. He looked at his son on the stairs, at the way the boy waved when their eyes met. You owe him a future where places like this don't collapse, he said. Do that. She nodded, eyes bright. I will. The final brace went in with a metallic groan, then silence. The building settled fully, stable at last. A small cheer rippled through the crew, relief loosening shoulders. Outside, cameras rolled as inspectors announced the stabilization. Celeste stepped aside and let him stand where she'd once commanded attention. Not because he asked, because it was right. He said little. He didn't need to. The truth was visible in steel and stone. When it was over, he descended the stairs and took his son's hand. Ready? Yeah, the boy said, smiling. You fixed it. We helped, he replied. As they walked away, the crowd parted without being told. Respect moved faster than rumor now. Behind them, Celeste Ward stood in a hard hat, watching a building she'd nearly lost and a man she'd never really seen. The exposure wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was permanent. They walked 2 blocks before either of them spoke, the noise of cameras fading behind them, replaced by gulls and traffic and the steady slap of water against the pier. The boy skipped once, then twice, testing normal again. He tightened his grip instinctively, not to stop him, just to stay connected. The building was stable now. That didn't mean the world was. It never had been. He felt the echo of it in his chest, the aftershock of responsibility easing slowly. At the bus stop, he checked the posted schedule, calculating without thinking. The habit never left. Time, distance, margin. The boy leaned against his side, head bumping his arm. "You were brave," the kid said, like it was obvious. He smiled at that, small and crooked. "You were," he answered. Bravery, he'd learned, was often just doing the next necessary thing without waiting for permission. Behind them, footsteps approached. He didn't turn right away. He already knew who it was. Celeste stopped a few feet back, breath slightly unsteady from hurrying, coat open, hair loose now. No entourage, no phone, just her. The space between them felt heavier than the distance suggested, filled with things unsaid and finally unavoidable. "I wanted to say this without cameras," she said. "Without an audience." He nodded once, acknowledgement without invitation. The boy watched her openly, curious, unafraid. She swallowed. "I built my career on control," she continued, "on believing I could see everything that mattered. Last night proved I was wrong." Her voice didn't crack. That almost made it harder. He waited. Silence had earned its place. "I dismissed you because it was easy," she said, "because it fit the story I was telling myself. That's on me." She inhaled, steadying. "I can't undo that, but I can change what follows." She held out a business card, then hesitated and lowered it. "Only if you want." He studied her face, the strain, the sincerity trying to survive pride. "I don't want back what I left," he said quietly, "and I won't be used to polish mistakes." The words weren't sharp, they were boundaries, and she nodded. "Then don't come to work for me," she said. "Help me fix what I broke." She gestured back toward the building, the skyline beyond it. "I'll put independent oversight on every project. Real authority, yours, if you choose. If not, someone like you." The admission cost her. He could tell. The bus hissed as it approached, brakes sighing. He felt the choice settle, heavy but clear. "I'll review," he said, "on my terms, publicly." He met her eyes, no shortcuts. Relief flickered across her face, then resolved. "Agreed." The doors opened. He guided the boy aboard, found a seat near the window. Celeste remained on the curb, watching. Hands clasped, no longer the center of gravity. As the bus pulled away, she lifted one hand in a small wave. He nodded back. Not forgiveness, not yet, recognition. The ride home was quiet, and the city slid past in familiar fragments. The boy rested his head against the glass, breath even. He watched reflections overlap, his face, his son's, the skyline stitched together by motion. He thought of the archives, of a name he'd stopped using because it carried too much weight. He thought of nights spent recalculating a smaller life, one that fit. When they stepped off, the air smelled like rain. Their building stood where it always had, unremarkable and solid. Inside, neighbors murmured hellos, unaware or pretending to be. He liked it that way. He unlocked the door, kicked off his shoes, set his keys down in the same place as always. Stability had rituals. He'd earned them. Later, after the boy slept, he stood at the window, city lights blinking. His phone buzzed once. A message. Not praise, not headlines. A forwarded memo from the inspector's office. Independent review committee established, effective immediately. His name listed without embellishment. Just a fact. Across the city, Celeste Ward sat alone in her office, glass walls reflecting a skyline she'd once believed she owned. She read the same memo, exhaled, and signed it without amendment. The power shift wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was structural, and this time it would hold. The meeting room overlooked the water, the same stretch of gray-blue that had hidden pressure beneath calm. He sat at the far end of the table, jacket folded on the chair beside him, hands resting flat on polished wood that felt too familiar. Across from him, inspectors, engineers, and 2 city officials waited, tablets ready, attention fixed. Celeste Ward stood near the window, not at the head, posture deliberately neutral. He began without ceremony, walking them through the failure points, the decisions that led there, the shortcuts that had seemed harmless until they weren't. He didn't dramatize. He didn't accuse me. He laid out facts the way structures demanded them. Load, stress, consequence. Heads nodded. Notes filled quickly. When questions came, they were precise, respectful. He answered them all, drawing on memories he'd never fully set down. The past didn't feel heavy here. It felt useful. Celeste spoke last. "Everything he's outlined will be adopted," she said. "Not just for this site, for all of them." She paused, then added, "And the record will reflect how we got here." That was the preparation. That was the line she crossed deliberately. Outside, cameras waited. Word had spread about the review. Yeah, about the man who'd stepped in when money couldn't. He could hear the murmur through the glass, feel the pull of a story forming whether he wanted it or not. Celeste turned to him. "They'll ask who you are," she said quietly. He nodded. "They can ask." The doors opened. Light and noise rushed in together. Reporters surged forward, questions overlapping, microphones raised. He stood where he was, not elevated, not hidden. The boy wasn't here. That mattered. This was work. A reporter asked about credentials. Another asked why he'd been there that night. He answered simply, grounding each response in responsibility, not revenge. When someone asked about being told he didn't belong, he paused, then said, "Belonging isn't decided by price tags." Celeste watched from the side, face composed, eyes bright. When asked about her role, she didn't deflect. She acknowledged failure. She is named bias. The crowd quieted at that. Accountability carried its own gravity. By the way, if you're still with us, hit subscribe so you don't miss how quiet truth reshapes loud rooms. The conference ended without applause. It didn't need it. The damage was documented, the fixes are mandated, the oversight is permanent. Cameras followed him only briefly as he stepped away, interest shifting towards statements and sound bites. He let it go. Later, alone again, he walked the perimeter of the building one last time. The temporary supports gleamed in afternoon light. Permanent plans waited inside. He felt the satisfaction of something set right, not perfectly, but honestly. Celeste joined him, stopping a respectful distance away. "It's done," she said. "It started," he corrected. She smiled, thin but genuine. Fair. They stood in silence, watching water move against stone. The city continued, indifferent and alive. He thought of his son at school, drawing buildings that stood because someone had cared enough to calculate twice. "I won't waste this," she said. He believed her. Or believed the structure they'd put in place would catch her if she tried. He turned and walked away, not because the story was over, but because the work was set to continue without him standing in the center. That was the point. Behind him, cameras packed up. Ahead, ordinary life waited. And somewhere between them, dignity settled into its rightful place, load-bearing and unseen. The next week unfolded without spectacle, which somehow made everything feel heavier. Repairs began behind temporary walls, steel arriving at dawn, or crews rotating in quiet efficiency. The waterfront returned to its rhythm, joggers and tourists passing the site with only a glance, unaware of how close it had come to collapse. He liked that. Stability wasn't meant to announce itself. He reviewed reports at his kitchen table after the boy went to bed, pages spread beside a mug gone cold. Numbers, diagrams, redlined decisions. Patterns emerged quickly. It wasn't just one mistake. It was a culture of small allowances stacked until they became risky. He annotated carefully, not to condemn, but to correct. Precision mattered. People lived inside these margins. Across the city, Celeste Ward felt the same weight settling in. Meetings ran longer now. Questions went deeper. Consultants bristled when told their assumptions were being challenged by someone who didn't wear the right suit. She let them bristle. For the first time in years, she wasn't rushing to smooth discomfort away. The review committee met again, this time without cameras, without urgency driving theatrics. He attended remotely, voice steady through the speaker as he flagged inconsistencies, requested data, and rejected language that softened responsibility. Each correction tightened something loose in the system. Each one made it harder for anyone to pretend later. At school pickup, another parent recognized him from the news clip that had circulated briefly before the story moved on. "That was you?" the man asked, impressed. He shrugged, smiled politely, and changed the subject. He'd learned long ago that admiration could turn just as quickly as contempt if you fed it. The boy tugged his hand as they walked home. "Are you fixing more buildings?" "I'm helping make them safer," he said. "That's good," the boy replied, satisfied. The judgment felt complete. On Thursday, Celeste visited the site alone. Hard hat on, boots scuffed now, she walked the reinforced floors slowly, hand brushing cool steel. The changes were visible if you knew where to look. Thicker supports, different angles, honest work. She remembered the whisper from that first night, the dismissal she'd allowed. The memory burned, but it also guided me. She wouldn't forget it. Not now. A reporter called her office asking for follow-up. She declined. "There's nothing new to say," she told her assistant. "We're doing the work." It felt strange to mean it. At the same time, messages trickled in from other developers, other firms. Quiet inquiries, curiosity framed as respect. She forwarded them all to the committee. Transparency wasn't optional anymore, it was structural. He received one message himself, forwarded by the inspector. An offer to consult privately, lucrative, discreet. He deleted it without replying. Discretion had been the problem. That night, as rain tapped the windows, he dreamed of calculations he hadn't touched in years, of drawings unrolling endlessly, each correction stabilizing something unseen. He woke before dawn, heart steady. The dream didn't haunt me. It clarified. By Friday, the city issued a preliminary statement acknowledging systemic issues uncovered by the review. No names highlighted, no heroes crowned. Just process, accountability, change. The statement felt heavier than praise would have. Celeste read it in her office, the skyline muted by low clouds. She closed her eyes briefly, then reopened them and went back to work. This was what transformation looked like when it wasn't staged. On Saturday morning, he took his son to the pier. They watched boats come and go, the water restless but contained. The boy pointed at a crane in the distance. "That one's holding a lot?" he said. "Yes," he replied. "But it's built for it." The boy nodded, absorbing more than words. As they walked back, his phone buzzed once more. A simple update from the committee. Revised standards adopted unanimously. Oversight funded independently. Implementation underway, no commentary, just a fact. He stopped walking for a moment, reading it twice. Not because he doubted it, because he needed to feel it settle. The injustice that had started the chain, small, casual, I whispered, had been answered not with humiliation in return, but with structure, with systems that would outlast anger. That felt right. Behind them, the city moved on, unaware of the quiet recalibration beneath its feet. And that, he knew, was the real victory. The reopening inspection took place on a clear morning, the kind that made steel gleam and water look deceptively calm. He stood back this time, hands in his pockets, letting the inspectors move freely through the space. The restaurant no longer smelled like polish and illusion. It smelled like new materials and patience. Celeste walked beside the lead inspector, answering questions without embellishment. She didn't rush him. She didn't interrupt. The habits she'd built over decades were being unlearned in real time, replaced by something slower and sturdier. He noticed. And change left signatures just like stress did. They paused at the east support, now fully reinforced, angles corrected, load paths honest. The inspector tapped it lightly, then checked his tablet. "This holds," he said simply. A murmur of relief moved through the room. Celeste exhaled and glanced toward him, a question in her eyes. He nodded once. Not approval, confirmation. Outside, a small group of journalists waited again, less aggressive now, their interest sharpened by follow-through instead of spectacle. Celeste stepped out first, flanked by city officials. She spoke briefly, naming the changes, crediting the process, deflecting praise away from herself. When asked about the man who'd identified the failure, she gestured back toward the entrance. He stepped into view, reluctant but composed. The question came quickly. "Do you feel vindicated?" He considered it. "I feel responsible," he said. "Vindication doesn't keep buildings standing." The answer traveled fast, quoted before he finished speaking. He didn't chase it. He didn't need to. Inside, staff returned to the space cautiously, touching tables, testing chairs, reacquainting themselves with a place that had nearly betrayed them. One of the servers from that first night caught his eye and smiled. A quiet thank you. He nodded back. Celeste joined him near the doorway once the crowd thinned. "We're reopening next week," she said. "Limited capacity, no shortcuts." "Good," he replied. She hesitated, then added, "I've made a donation." He raised an eyebrow. "To the City Fund for Independent Inspections," she clarified. "No branding, no announcement." He allowed himself a small smile. That's the right direction." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching sunlight stretch across the reinforced floor. The space felt different now, less impressive, more real. "I used to think power was about control," she said quietly. "Now, I think it's about restraint." He glanced at her, surprised. "It's about listening," he said, "even when you don't like what you hear." She nodded, absorbing it. His phone buzzed. A message from the school reminding parents about an early dismissal. He checked the time and sighed softly. "I should go." "Of course," she said. "And thank you." He met her gaze. "Don't thank me. Maintain it." She smiled, accepting the charge. As he walked away, he passed the place where he'd been told he didn't belong. The memory had lost its sting, replaced by something steadier. He belonged where responsibility lived. Everywhere else was negotiable. Outside, the city moved around him, indifferent and resilient. He boarded the bus, found a seat, watched the restaurant recede through the window. It stood solid now, not because of money or status, but because someone had been willing to say no when it mattered. That evening, he picked up his son early. They walked home together under a sky streaked with orange and gray. "Did they fix it?" the boy asked. "Yes," he said. "They fixed it right." The boy smiled, satisfied. "Good." As they reached their building, he felt the quiet weight of the weeks lifting, replaced by something lighter and harder earned. Justice hadn't been loud. It hadn't humiliated anyone in return. It had simply held. The week before reopening passed without headlines, which felt like a victory all its own. He returned to his routines, the quiet scaffolding of his life clicking back into place. Mornings meant coffee measured by habit, not urgency. Work meant reviewing plans that would never carry his name, only his care. The city hadn't changed, he had. At the office, a junior engineer stopped him near the copier, nervous energy buzzing. "I heard about the restaurant," she said. "What you did?" He tilted his head. "I did my job." She shook her head. "You did it when it wasn't safe to." He studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "That's when it matters." The words stayed with her. He could tell. Small transmissions like that were how standards survived. Later that afternoon, a sealed envelope waited on his desk. No return address, but he recognized the handwriting immediately. Inside was a handwritten note and a copy of a city ordinance draft. Celeste's influence was all over it, subtle but undeniable. Mandatory third-party structural reviews for public venues, randomized scheduling, penalties with tithe. At the bottom, a single line. "You were right. I should have listened sooner." He folded the note carefully and placed it in his drawer. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. That night, he cooked dinner while his son did homework at the table. The clatter of pans, the low hum of traffic outside, the ordinary choreography of a life uninterrupted. "Are you famous now?" the boy asked without looking up. He smiled. "No." "Good," the boy said. "Famous people miss stuff." He stirred the pot, letting the steam fog his glasses. "I don't plan to." After dinner, they sat on the couch, a documentary murmuring in the background. His phone buzzed again. A message from a number he didn't recognize. It was a photo of the restaurant interior, empty and ready, chairs aligned, lights warm. Beneath it, doors open. "Monday, first table's on us if you want it." He typed back slowly. "Thanks. But give it to the staff. They earned it." The reply came a moment later. "They'll like that." Monday arrived quietly. He passed the restaurant on his walk to work. Windows glowing, a small line forming. No banners, no speeches, just people trusting a place again. He paused, watching for a second, then kept moving. At lunch, his supervisor called him in. No reprimand, no praise, just an update. The city had approved the ordinance draft for committee review. "You stirred something," she said carefully. "Are you okay with that?" He considered the question. "I didn't stir it," he said. "I stopped pretending it wasn't already boiling." She nodded, accepting the answer. That evening, he received an email from the junior engineer. A thank you. A promise to speak up sooner next time. He didn't reply immediately. When he did, it was brief. Do the work. Say the thing. Trust the math. On Wednesday, a city council member requested a meeting. On Thursday, a trade journal asked for a comment. He declined both. Visibility wasn't the goal. Durability was. Friday night, he and his son walked past the restaurant again. Laughter spilled onto the sidewalk. Plates clinked. The building held, quietly doing what it was meant to do. The boy squeezed his hand. "It's standing," he said. "Yes," he replied, "because people listened." They stood there a moment longer, then turned toward home. He felt no surge of triumph, No need for recognition. What he felt was alignment between what he knew and what he did, between responsibility and action. The world didn't reward that kind of alignment often, but sometimes, if you hold your ground long enough, it meets you halfway. The night settled without ceremony. No speeches, no flashing lights, no last-minute twists waiting to prove something. He stood at the window of his apartment, watching the city do what it always did: move, pause, breathe, repeat. Somewhere across the blocks, a building held its weight exactly as designed. That was enough. He thought about how close it had all come to going the other way, how easily silence could have passed for professionalism, how often discomfort was mistaken for inconvenience instead of warning. The memory didn't make his chest tighten anymore. It sharpened his attention. In the days that followed, the ordinance passed the committee, then council, then quietly became policy. No one called him about it after that. Systems rarely remembered the hands that nudged them back on course. They only remembered whether they failed again. At work, he noticed changes that didn't announce themselves. Meetings slowed down. Questions were asked twice. Younger engineers spoke earlier, less afraid of being labeled difficult. The culture didn't transform overnight, but it leaned. Sometimes that was all progress needed. At home, life stayed stubbornly ordinary. Lunch packed, homework checked, stories read before bed. His son asked fewer questions about the restaurant now, more about bridges and why some buildings curved while others stood straight. He answered when he could, admitted when he couldn't, and the honesty felt like inheritance. One evening, a handwritten note arrived from a stranger, a contractor, someone who'd walked out of a job rather than sign off on something unsafe, citing a story they'd heard secondhand. He folded the note and placed it with the others, not as proof, but as a pattern. He passed the restaurant less often now. When he did, it blended into the city, exactly where it belonged. The staff moved easily inside. The laughter sounded unforced. Nothing about it asked for forgiveness anymore. He understood then that the victory hadn't been personal. It hadn't even been visible. It lived in the absence of collapse, in the quiet competence of people choosing to care when cutting corners would have been easier. It lived in restraint. Late one night, he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, thinking about the moment he'd spoken up, how small it had felt, how exposed, how necessary. Courage, he realized, rarely arrived with confidence. It arrived with clarity and the willingness to be uncomfortable longer than everyone else. The city outside hummed. Somewhere, another decision was being delayed. Somewhere else, someone was being told to stay in their lane. The pattern would repeat. It always did. But now he knew something he hadn't before. That refusal could travel. That quiet insistence could outlast noise. That doing the right thing without demanding credit wasn't a weakness. It was infrastructure. He turned off the light and headed to bed, ready for morning. Ready for work that wouldn't make headlines. Ready for the next moment that asked him who he was when it counted. And before we go, I want to hear from you. Ask me for the next story title you want us to tackle. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Single dad refused to show ID at airport security. TSA laughed until the red phone rang. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next? Some stories end with applause. This one ended the way it began, with something standing because someone refused to look away.